This video is about how to follow the order of operations when you are evaluating the quadratic formula to find the x-intercepts of a quadratic function. So if I want to use the quadratic formula to find the x-intercepts of this function, I need to identify my a, b, and c values. There's an invisible 1 in front of the x squared, so my a is 1. There's a -3 in front of the x term, so my b is -3. And -4 is the number with no variable, so my c is -4. The quadratic formula tells us that the x-intercepts are equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And it's important to note that the minus 4ac is under the square root. So for this function, I'm going to plug in my a, b, and c values. I'll have that the x-intercepts are equal to my b is -3 plus or minus the square root of -3 squared. That's my b squared minus 4 times my a is 1 times my c is -4. All over 2 times my a is 1. So that's the setup. When we go to evaluate this, so calculate it, figure out what number it works out to, it's very important to follow the order of operations. We sometimes use the acronym PEMDAS to help us remember this. P stands for parentheses, E stands for exponents, M stands for multiplication, D stands for division, A stands for addition, S stands for subtraction. So this tells us to evaluate things in parentheses first, then evaluate our exponents. Multiplication should be done in order from left to right. It doesn't necessarily have to be multiplication before division. Just do both of those operations from left to right. And then same thing with addition and subtraction. You can subtract before you add. Those two are kind of in a group that should go from left to right. So now I'm going to use that order of operations to evaluate the expression for my quadratic formula. So I don't really have any parentheses. I only have parentheses that are representing multiplication, but I don't have any separate groupings that I need to look at first. So I'm going to move on to my exponents. So I'll keep everything else the same for right now, and I'll just evaluate my exponent. It's really important that the negative on my -3 is included here when I'm doing the squaring. So -3 squared means -3 times -3, which is +9. So what I'm doing here again is -3 squared means -3 times -3, which is +9. You want to make sure that you don't do -3 squared like that. You don't want to square the 3 on its own and then apply the negative. You want to include the negative with the -3 as you're squaring. Okay, so I'm going to keep everything else the same for right now, just looking at one step at a time. So we didn't have any parentheses and we've handled all of our exponents. Now we can move on to multiplication and division. So the first place I see multiplication is with my -b here. -b really means -1 times b. In this case, I have -1 times -3, which gives me a +3. Plus or minus the square root. This 9 minus, it's going to stay the same. And now I can do my multiplication among this 4ac. So I'm evaluating this 4 times 1 times -4. 4 times 1 gives me 4. And then 4 times negative 4 is negative 16. So now this is 9 minus negative 16. And then in the denominator, I can do my 2 times 1 because that's multiplication. And 2 times 1 gives me 2. All right. So we had no parentheses, we evaluated our exponents, and we did the multiplication and division. Now I can move on to my addition and subtraction. I forgot to mention at the beginning that we want to simplify everything under the radical first, everything under the square root first, before we're able to add and subtract that square root, and then eventually do our actual division by the denominator. So now I'm going to do the subtraction that I see in my square root. 9 minus negative 16 gives me 25. Now I can simplify my square root. I know that the square root of 25 is 5, so this is equal to 3 plus or minus 5 over 2. All right, and now we're ready to actually break into our plus version and our minus version. So this 3 plus or minus 5 means that we have one version where we have a plus 5 here, and we have one version where we have a minus 5 here. So in my plus version, 3 plus 5 is 8, and 8 divided by 2 gives me 4. In our minus version, 3 minus 5 is negative 2, and negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So my x-intercepts for this function, or my solutions to the function, are 4, 0, and negative 1, 0. So the important thing to take away from this video is that when you are evaluating an expression from plugging into the quadratic formula, you need to follow the order of operations. So as you're simplifying under the radical, make sure you do the exponent first and include the negative when you're squaring. Then do your multiplication of the 4ac, and then do your subtraction of the b squared minus the 4ac. Then you can finish simplifying your radical and break into your different plus and minus versions to get your final answer.